it's a pleasure to have you here with us. I'm very nervous, like I said, because you are a reference for us when you talked about uh, design, UX design. I read your book twice because it was very important to my career and how I work today. It's because your yes, this is this is the art.
Yeah, yeah. You use it so much because during our experience background, building teams, defining purpose to our teams, I especially use your knowledge so much.
Excellent.
And yeah, and we are so grateful for your presence. Thank you so
Happy to
much.
be here.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. And we have just three questions for you, and will be amazing to hear about you for this subject. And I will make the first question for you.
Sure.
So, do you think that designers are prepared to assume these rising leadership positions in your industry? What do you think about that?
So I think, excuse me, I think the key word in there is prepared. Because I, by and large, think that designers are not prepared to assume these rising leadership positions. What I see is designers being promoted or applying for roles and being offered jobs that they don't really understand what the job is, and the people around them aren't doing what they should to prepare them for that job. I find in many contexts that companies just aren't good at training and teaching their leadership how to do their work as they evolve. And so what ends up happening is that designers resort to what they already know, and without that mentorship, don't know what they don't know, right? And so, a case in point, you're a designer, you've been working on a team, you've been growing as a designer on a team, and in that role as a designer, you look at your manager. And you think you know what your manager does based on your interactions with that person. And you think, well, that's the job of a manager. And then, so if you get promoted into a manager, you do what that manager did. But there was probably, if that manager was doing their job right, there was a lot of things that manager was doing that you didn't see. Now, if they weren't doing their job right, there was probably things that they should have been doing that you didn't see. But so when you start as a manager, you just do the things that you thought managers do, not realizing all these other responsibilities that managers have. And then the same goes as you go from being a manager, say, to a director, right? The manager's like, oh, I know what a director does because they're managing me. So when I become a director, I'll manage managers. But it turns out the job of a director, managing managers, is not even, maybe a quarter of the job of a director is to manage their managers. A director needs to be spending most of their time outside of the design team, working cross-functionally, working with, if we're talking about in kind of software environments, working with product managers, working with engineers, working with executives and other leaders. And this is thing as a manager, looking at a director, you wouldn't know they were having all these conversations. And so, what happens is as people get promoted into these new levels of authority and more senior levels, they don't actually know what's expected of them. And over time, they'll usually figure it out. They'll get some counsel. They'll make some mistakes. They'll be told, hey, why aren't you doing this? This is what we're expecting of you, and they'll get there. But to kind of get back to the question you asked, we're not preparing people for that. We're just kind of throwing them in it. I don't know if you have this phrase in Portuguese, but what we call sink or swim, right? You throw them into the water and they either sink or they swim, and no one's going to help them figure that out. And that's something we need to change. And it's actually something I've been focusing my efforts on when I teach design leadership, or some of the work when I've been writing on my petermerholz.com blog, trying to help leaders understand what's actually expected of them in this new role, which is probably different than what they think it is.
Wow.
Great,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I agree
Yeah.
with you 100% because we can see that kind of problem here. We are talking about leadership. Okay, everyone needs to be leader, but how I can build myself to be a leader. So because no one's are prepared for that. So perfect. Yeah, perfect. Burichi?
Yeah. Peter, I have another question together. This question, in your opinion, what do you think that brought us to this moment? To this moment when designers are so requested to be leaders, to create teams and sit in this business table. In your
Right.
opinion, what do you think?
For me, it goes back to a phrase called "software is eating the world," right? And this comes from this article or essay that Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist, wrote that was in the Wall Street Journal. And the thesis of that essay, we continue to see it play out every day, more and more so, is that every business is a tech business now, because they all require software in order to do their work. So I've been doing a fair bit of work supporting banks. So typically, I work primarily as an independent consultant. And I've been brought in a few times now into these banks who are scaling their design organizations. And the reason they're scaling their design organizations is because they're scaling their technology capability. And you can't build usable software without design. Like, that is understood. The reason they're building these technology organizations is because every bank is now a fintech, right? They were a bank, I know of, there's a Brazilian bank, Itaú, right? So 20, 30 years ago, Itaú was just a bank, and they had branches, and you would go to the branch, and maybe you were using an ATM, and that was like your interaction. And so they were a bank. Yes, they had some technology, right? Banks were early on with things like COBOL and other certain systems. And now every bank in 2020, 2021 is essentially a software concern, right? Like, Itaú can't do its business without large technology teams developing software to help customers do their own banking, to help the bankers with banking, to figure out all kinds of stuff that happens in the background, right? It's not a matter of like writing things on pieces of paper and moving that around anymore. Whatever banking looked like 30 years ago, it doesn't look like that today. And that's not just true of banking. That's true of literally every industry. Every company is now a software company. And when that happens, when you're building software, you need technology teams, product development teams, and with that, you need design. And so the reason we're at the stage we're at now is because there's these software development teams inside every company, and they realize they need designers in order to develop software that doesn't suck. And so as engineers, as more and more engineers get hired, as more and more product people get hired, more and more designers get hired. And so now we have to figure out how we as designers work within these environments. And that's been one of my missions and part of the reason I co-wrote the book is design to be its most successful, for design to be as effective as design can be, it shouldn't simply do what engineers do or what product people do in terms of organization and recruiting and hiring and those factors. When design tries to behave like these other organizations, it actually is worse for the design team, and it makes the designers unhappy and unfulfilled. And so the question now for us as we scale design within these organizations is to how to do right by the design organization within these larger organizations that don't necessarily understand design.
Yeah, perfect. And the leadership rule in this complexity, it's very, very important, right? The design leadership, it's a piece of this piece of cake of that kind of complexity, right? And Peter, what kind of knowledge do you think it's important for designers to do the best work as a leader in this complex world?
Yeah. So the irony, I don't know if it's an irony, but the thing that a lot of designers, as they become leaders, don't realize is that being a leader is now less about your design ability in your design practice, and you need to develop and adopt a new set of leadership abilities and leadership practices. And so while it helps you as a design leader to understand visual design and interaction design and user research and those practices, you're not going to do them anymore, at least once you get to a certain point, right? Maybe early on, you're still doing some of that. But once you're a director, you're not practicing any design anymore. And so what leaders need to understand is they need to understand. So I co-host a podcast with one of my old business partners, Jesse James Garrett, right? He and I we started Adaptive Path together. And we host this podcast and we talk a lot about design leadership. And one of the emerging themes of the podcast was that leadership is relationship. So the skills that you need as a leader are not design skills, are not can you solve a design problem? Are you really good at wireframing, or are you really good at prototyping? It's more, do you know how to talk to other people and especially those outside of design, and engage with them and understand them and appreciate their perspective and help them appreciate your perspective, and be a I refer to this as a diplomat, right? Diplomacy. Be a diplomat for design with these other functions so that they understand what you need to succeed and you understand what they need to succeed. And now you can kind of work together to figure that out. So you need to develop relationship skills. You need to develop communication skills. You need to develop presentation and persuasion skills. You need to develop, in any organization, you need to understand the business that you're in, right? Designers, particularly historically, where so much design came from an agency background, where you kind of get plugged in to the business, and it almost didn't matter what the business was. You know, when I was at Adaptive Path, we worked for banks, we worked for tech companies, we worked for healthcare companies, we worked for enterprise software companies, and we kind of didn't care because what we brought was our process to solve the problem and how we thought the problem. Now that you're an internal design leader, you can't just bring your process and say that's all you're responsible for. You need to understand the business you're in. You need to understand, if you're in a bank, if you're at Itaú, you need to understand what their strategy is and what matters to the people in the business in terms of where they see the opportunities as a business. So you now need to understand strategy. You need to understand sometimes regulations, right? In the United States, banks are heavily regulated industries. Designers actually need to understand that so they don't propose solutions that violate these regulations, right? So as you become a leader and responsible for this, you need to understand those qualities. So design leaders need to embrace relationship skills and then that kind of business savvy, that strategic understanding and awareness of the context in which they're operating.